Okay, in the UK it's 12 o'clock and that means it's time for session 3AI. This is Marco Cardelli, the product manager for HCL, and he's going to be talking about importing and deploying workload automation containers on zCX. Remember, please, to fill in your feedback forms at the end of the session. Questions into the chat, please, and then Marco can either answer them as he goes along or at the end, depending on what's appropriate. Please remember to show your appreciation for the time that our speakers are giving up today, and donate generously to our charities this year, the RNLI and the Guide Dogs for the Blind. And as always, follow the link on your receipt and enter your receipt number so that you can be entered into the raffle for every £1 you donate. Okay, so I'll hand you over to Marco now. Please enjoy the session and thank you for attending.
Okay, thank you, Anna. This is Marco speaking. Good morning to everybody that joined this session or will follow this session afterwards. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a new topic concerning IBM Z Workload Scheduler. So it's the possibility to deploy workload automation containers on zCX, which is a specific new, quite recent Z feature. So what I'm going to talk to you today is I will give you a brief introduction about zCX. Actually, this is something still brand new. It's been around for maybe a year or two, the possibility to use the container extension on ZOS, but I don't think it's been still exploited that much. So I think it needs an introduction. We will talk about the prerequisites, how to configure the property file, workflow steps, and basically how to configure a zCX instance, how to connect to the instance. And then the very last part is about actually how to deploy the containers, the workload automation containers on a zCX instance. You will see that basically most of the presentation is about configuring a zCX instance. Once you have that, deploying the workload automation container is very straightforward. So that gives you an idea of how easy that can be. So let's start with an introduction on zCX. So what is it? It's a new feature that was delivered with ZOS 2.4 that enables the deployment of Linux applications as Docker contain in their containerized version on ZOS, and they become part of a ZOS workload. So this picture I added to this introductory, to these slides in the introduction, show actually how the ZOS system basically includes the zCX instances. So you get a zCX instance as a standard address space in a ZOS system. So it maintains operational control of the Linux environment within a ZOS installation. You don't need to have a separate LPAR with the zLinux system. So it does support any container that has been built for zLinux. So if you have a containerized applications that is supported on zLinux, it will also run on zCX instance. So what exactly zCX can do? Basically allows to bring these Dockerized Linux applications very close to the ZOS resources. So without the need of importing every part of an open source infrastructure into the ZOS system, the zCX is just what you need to run these Dockerized Linux applications on ZOS. So for example, ZOS provides, you need to use VSON files and TCP/IP stack to enable encryption, disaster recovery, dynamic workload relocation, and all these features apply also to a zCX instance without any disruption of the Linux applications that run on the zCX instance. So it does support a high number of Docker images that allow to integrate the ZOS system in your, let's say, cloud pipelines. Basically allows the ZOS system to participate more in common DevOps scenarios and any other kind of automation environments. So first of all, zCX, it's something that can be used to run containerized applications on ZOS. Now, why you want to do that? Because you could simply run those applications on a Linux image. The reason why is that on ZOS you can use some ZOS resources and perhaps have a very efficient configuration of applications that communicate with other applications that you have running on ZOS. So it may be worth to explore this possibility. In particular, this is true for the workload automation containers. And for Z customers, I would say particularly for the dynamic workload console, so installing the containerized version of the dynamic workload console on ZOS, it can be very easy and improve a lot your maintenance of this installation. And also, you can think about using the Z-centric containers on ZOS for some specific scenarios that will come handy with the next version of the product. For example, to perform some file transfer scenarios of Z files without the need of installing a Z-centric agent on a distributed machine. What are the differences between a zCX extension and a zLinux real system? Well, the zCX contains only part of the Linux system. It actually contains everything that is needed to run Docker software appliances, but not more than that. So it's lighter than a whole zLinux system. So remember that this Linux environment is tailored to support the Docker command line, and it is not supposed to be a general purpose operating environment. So you cannot use it as a normal standard zLinux environment. So now let's take a look at the prerequisites. We have seen that this feature is pretty recent. So it has both hardware and software prerequisites. Hardware means that the mainframe must be at least Z14. So for now, I think it's only Z14. I'm not sure if also Z15 is available. Probably yes. Anyway, yeah, yes, probably the latest one is Z15. But basically, you need at least Z14 for supporting zCX. And of course, you have to consider CPU, memory, and storage allocation specific for zCX. So you need to take a look at the manuals and see what is required to start a zCX instance. From a software point of view, so zCX is a new element of the z/OS system that includes the Linux kernel and the Docker engine, and also the z/OS MF workflow facility. So you need this, of course, the zCX, that includes also the z/OS management facility. This is used to deploy and configure a zCX instance. And all the systems in the sysplex need to be at least on z/OS version 2.4. So these are the prerequisites. I'm not sure if you have ever used in your environment the IBM z/OS management facility. Certainly, it's not needed to install IBM Z Workload Scheduler, but is already used by a number of products on z/OS for deployment, configuration, and so on. So you need this z/OS component, the z/OS management facility, to provision, deprovision, and maintain zCX instances. Specifically, you need to use a functionality of this component that is called z/OS MF workflows to the provisioning and the maintenance of a zCX instance. So the user that needs to be the one to provision a zCX instance must have access also to the z/OS MF facility and the z/OS MF workflows facility. There are a few commands that you must issue from the Z console to start the management facility. And of course, I'm just referring here some commands, but you can find all these documented in the z/OS MF components. So the very first step of the zCX provisioning workflow is used to collect all the necessary variable values. This can be either provided in an input properties file or directly configured from the z/OS MF interface. Now we take a look at this input property file, and you will see that there is a bunch of parameters that have to do with the system. So this is something that needs a system programmer to be configured. And now let's see the property file. So the property file is also documented, of course, in the IBM Z Workload Scheduler documentation. But as you can see, there are a number of variables that concern the zCX configurations that needs to be set up with installation directories, the name of the instance, the registry directory for the instance, then many other parameters that are related to the configuration, including CPU and memory, network configuration, some of the root and configuration storage that are related to the zCX instance, more data that are related to the possibility to configuration of the swap of this that address space, user data configuration, Docker configuration, the proxy, and other Docker user management. So these are all values that you can find, of course, in the zCX documentation, how to set up, but that's basically all that you need, most of what you need to do to configure a zCX instance. So for the provisioning of a zCX instance, you need to start a workflow in a ZOS management facility. Let's take a look at how it works. So first of all, you need to create the workflow in the ZOS management facility user interface. So you can insert in the create workflow panel, the workflow definition file and also the property file. So in this way, you can predefine all the variables that you have seen in the input configuration file. In step 2, you need to specify the user ID, the name of the workflow, and the security level that you want to associate to this instance. So then when you create the workflow, this is what it looks like in the ZOS management facility. You have a number of steps that are automatically created for the workflow. We will see now that the first step allows you to change the configuration values. You may have defined them with the input property file, or you can use this step to define these variables. Then there is all the other steps are executed automatically. And the last one will give you the command that you need to issue to start the zCX instance. So this is step 1, where you can configure the variables from the ZOS management facility. So these are, as you can see, some of the same names that are in the input configuration file. So you can choose to configure them initially in the property file and just reference the file in the workflow, or use this step to define all these values. Then you get to a panel when you can choose, and you should do that, to perform automated steps. So the selected step from 2 on can be performed automatically, and you need to select that option. All the steps are executed automatically. So in the meantime, all the files, all the configuration of the zCX instance is performed. And you get to the last step of the workflow, the instruction to start the zCX instance. So you get actually the ZOS console command you need to perform. So after you copy the command that you need to execute on the system, basically the workflow, the provision workflow for the zCX instance is complete. And you can consider all this part of the process achieved, let's say. So let's see now how these zCX instance can be started. You just need to, I guess you recognize this panel. This is probably much more commonly used than the ZOS management facility. You can paste here the command that you got from the workflow to start the zCX instance. And in this way, you actually start the zCX instance. The address space that represents the zCX instance will be started. And you will get some information, these messages in the log saying that we give you the SSH client port number to connect to the ZOS container extension, and also where is the server listening on the IP address on which the server is listening. So in this way, you have started the zCX instance. Now the point is how to communicate with the zCX instance. Basically, what you have there is a Linux environment where you can connect and start containerized applications that were built for Linux systems. So you have basically two ways to communicate with the zCX instance. And there is a client where you can specify port number and IP address. This is the way you can start the SSH client on the console, on the UXX console. Or the other communication that you can establish is through FTP, basically, secure FTP. And this is very important because, of course, you need a way to move your containers from another system or a distributed system or a Linux system to the ZOS, to the zCX instance where they have to be started. So you need a way to issue commands and to connect with the instance, and that is through SSH client, and a way to FTP the containers you want to execute on that zCX instance. That's basically all you need to connect to the zCX instance. As you have seen, until now, everything that we have done, everything that is needed is just related to the zCX instance. We have not been talking yet about workload automation. So all this process is a kind of prerequisite to have the zCX environment, the zCX instance started on a ZOS system. Now, of course, if you run other containerized applications on ZOS, not only the workload automation containers, this part of the process is going to be very quick because you will have someone skilled to do it. So you won't have any more relationship to the workload automation part. You just need the zCX instance started and to start your workload automation containers. So now what we are going to talk about is how to move the containers into the zCX instance. So you can use only secure file transfer protocol to move files into the zCX instance. So once you are connected to the system, you can issue the put command with, of course, the container name you want to, the tar file of the container that you want to import, and put it into the /tmp directory. To do that, you need to own, so you need to have the necessary access. You must be the owner of the .tar file of the container you want to import, and you need to import it directly in the TMP directory of the instance. Of course, you need to make sure that you have enough storage, depending on how big is the tar file of the container. Also consider that you will have to untar it, and so you need the necessary space to have the container in the zCX installation. So this is how to put the container into the zCX instance. Now let's see how the containers can be deployed. So from the SSH session, you need to issue the command docker load -i with the path of the directory where the file, the tar file is stored. So docker load is the first command you need to issue to deploy the container, and then you just need to start the container issuing the docker run with the container name command. It is possible to deploy with Docker Compose. Once you have executed the docker run command, the container is up and running. So, for example, if you have the container of the workload automation console, you have already the dynamic workload automation console active, started on the system. So then, of course, you need to execute some configuration steps, the usual ones on the dynamic workload console, but you don't need to do any specific installation. The installation is a part of the container. So when you deploy a container with an application pre-installed, you don't need to really install that component. You don't need to install the dynamic workload console. You just need to start the container with that includes the dynamic workload console. And think about how easy this can be in your environment, rather than spending some time, some effort to install really everything that concerns the dynamic workload console. In theory, you can install in this way all the workload automation containers. So we did build them, a workload automation server, even the console, then the dynamic agent, and then the centric agents. They are all supported on zLinux, so they can also be automatically installed in the ZOS system with a zCX extension. Of course, I don't see as a interesting use case to install the server on a zCX instance. If you want to run a distributed server, you probably have a better performance and a better situation running it directly on zLinux. But it can be very useful for the workload automation console and the workload automation, either dynamic or zCentric agents. They can be both connected actually to a Z controller. In theory, just the zCentric agent, but the dynamic agent can also be part of a configuration with the Z controller if you also install a dynamic domain manager. So depending on which configuration you're using, you can have both. But in a standard configuration with the zCentric agent directly connected to a Z controller, that's another component that you can install on zCX. And which would be the reason. For example, you want to execute some applications that run on a remote distributed server, but you don't want really to install the zCentric agent on the distributed server. And you want to use, for example, one of our plugins that execute remotely on a distributed server or on a cloud environment. You can do that. And you can even install the zCentric agent on ZOS if you want. Or since we are delivering with version 10 the new file transfer, and also some new component that is used for supporting AI features on the workload automation. I'm not sure if you have seen my presentation yesterday, but these two are two of the most important enhancements that we will deliver with version 10. So basically, one is managed file transfer, the possibility to use our agents to move files in your environment. And the other one is supporting some anomaly detection scenarios with an AI component that is called AI Data Advisor. These new components, well, the managed file transfer requires a new component that is called file proxy. And this is required also in a Z configuration, in an end-to-end configuration. But both of these components will be available on container, and you can decide to deploy them also on the ZOS system. So the potential of running containers on ZOS is not really to replace the IBM Z workload scheduler main components, to substitute them with a workload automation server, distributed server. No, I don't think this is really worth, and I don't think this is providing any specific value. But the deployment of some other components like the console, the agent for some situations, the new file proxy, and the AI Data Advisor, all these containerized components, you can decide to deploy them on ZOS if you don't want to have a configuration with too many components running on distributed machines or distributed virtual machines connected to your Z configuration. So what we have seen in this presentation is basically how you can deploy a zCX, you can provision a zCX instance on the system. This is really something that might be a task for a system programmer, but we wanted anyway to show you how that process occurs, which are the prerequisites, which is the hardware and the software that you need to have to deploy a zCX instance. How this is different from a zLinux image? You don't have a full Linux operating system environment in the zCX instance. You just have what is needed to run Dockerized applications. We showed also how this instance can be customized through the input property file or through the ZOS management facility, and how to import the containers and deploy them. But really, the part that relates to workload automation is just this one. I mean, you until the transfer of the container on the zCX instance, basically this is the same path that you need to do for any containerized applications that you want to run on a zCX system. So what is related to workload automation really is to choose the right containers to deploy, how to deploy it on the zCX instance, and how to start it. That's all you need to know. Then at that point, after starting, you have that component available on the system. So I think I finished a little earlier, but I'm open to questions. This is something brand new that we are supporting with workload automation since the latest fixpack. The container images have been, the workload automation container images have been updated to support the Linux environment. And we have tried this scenario also on the zCX instance. So now this is available also for workload automation. I need to exit the show where there are questions. I don't see any question in the chat. Not sure if
I set you up so that you can unmute yourselves in order to ask your questions directly. So please feel free to do that now. Marco, if you could show the last GSE slide.
yes.
Yes, not the last, the second to last. So everybody, if you can remember to please do your feedback for the session. Question 5, I think it is. No, one of the questions is about the length of the presentation. Sorry that this one had to come in a bit short. But the answer for the length question is not the same as for all the others. So it's a midpoint 5 for just right. And please show your appreciation for Marco's time in providing this session. And I do ask you to donate generously to the charities for this year. Okay, so we'll wait a couple of minutes, see if there's any questions or comments. Don't be shy.
Well, this is a brand new topic, so maybe there is need to do some, thinking about it before asking questions.
Yeah. Okay, then if you like to leave the session, if you're ready, then please do so.
Okay, thank you to all the participants, and thank you to Anna, of course.
Thank you.